Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Maryland Pork Producers Summer Learning Series. Today, talking about swine nutrition, is Nathan Holloway from the mill.
Perfect, Maggie. Thank you for having me on. We always like helping, and especially when it comes to educational purposes, we get a lot of value out of that and fulfillment. But my name is Nathan Halloway. I'm with the mill, so the mill of Bel Air, themillstores.com, so on and so forth. We love talking about animals, and we love trying to help people feed animals. And I think if we can help do some of this stuff, we like it a lot. So we're gonna talk a lot about just basic swine nutrition, but there will be plenty of kind of show feed influence in it, just because it's show season. There's a lot of people showing hogs right now, so a lot of it will be show based, but it's predominantly just based around that nutrition piece. So, but I'm gonna try to go from start to finish. So when these pigs first hit the ground, all the way up to finish, which is pretty much now when a lot of these county fairs are starting. So. And I'm going to keep it fairly broad, but I'm going to try to dive into the stuff that's important. So to start, a lot of these breeders, especially these hogs that are showing right now, those pigs were hitting the ground probably about January, maybe a few Decembers, but then January and February timeframe. We typically wean these pigs around 3 to 4 weeks, but we want to start, say, introducing some feed. So like a pre-starter or starter feed around that kind of 10 to 17 day window, so that when we do end up weaning them, they can really hit the ground running and they can take off. Almost every pig out there, once it's weaned, right, that's a huge stressful change. That pig is going to hit a little bit of a lull for about a week or two. So we want to do everything we can to get those pigs' stomachs ready to be able to take that nutrition outside of just milk, but get that starter feed in them early, so that way when they do get weaned, they don't hit that really bad lull. And for a lot of these people that are selling these show pigs, we need them to bloom and we need them to take off as soon as they get off wean. So it's really, really important that we start introducing feed early and often, so that way when they do get weaned, they can really roll. With that being said, kind of some basics around feed, and when we're looking at tags, this really helps us, especially for these baby pigs. Protein is the most important thing for these pigs early on, because we need to build structure, frame, and muscle. So like your typical, let's just use Sunglow pre-starter. I think it's a 24% protein, so it's really, really high. And then right along with that is that lysine. So lysine is really crucial for overall growth. And don't quote me on the lysine on that one, but it's high. It's probably around like 1.2, 1.3-ish, but that lysine's really high. When a typical, say, grower feed is going to be around a 1.0. So pre-starter, we'll typically use a little bit of that just when they're first on that mother. And then around that weaning time frame, we're going to switch to a regular starter feed. I personally like using a pellet early on because, one, it's going to sift through the feeder as soon as you wean them. It's going to sift through the feeder a lot better than a meal-based feed will. And it's going to be a little bit more conducive to getting better consumption out of it. So all of these starter feeds are actually a micro pellet too, so that way it's easier for them to eat. So, and then from there, once we wean them, we'll use a starter feed from, say, when we wean them up to 50, 75 pounds whenever we end up selling them. And from there, we can transition them to an 18% protein type feed, or some sort of transition feed, or something like grower finish, or just something to get them going. We feed these starter feeds for a little bit longer. So we're going to feed them up to that 50, 75 pound range, because it's going to really make them pop and bloom. And if we're talking show pigs and we're trying to sell them, they need to really pop and they need to bloom. So that way they need to look the part in order to keep them. So from there, and then so that's the breeder's perspective, right? That's all breeder. From there, we can talk about a lot of you all who have bought your animals, and now you're at the end of that cycle. But when you first get them, it's really important to transition them right. If that pig was on a 22% protein to start, and then we go all the way down to a 16% protein, that's a really, really big jump, and we don't want them to crash down that hard. But we need to transition that. We can absolutely move to a 16, but you don't want to do it overnight. You really want to try to transition them into that feed. anymore, these pigs that a lot of people are buying are super heavy muscled. So they almost look like they're blown out of the seams, look like a little tiny mini Arnold Schwarzenegger. That's okay, but you have to feed them differently. You do not want to feed that super heavy muscled hog a super high protein feed, because that's only just going to exemplify that muscle and make that animal pop. Versus we almost need to melt them down a little bit, so that way all that frame and skeleton and structure can catch up to all that muscle. If we try to push these hogs way too early and way too hard, it can just end up causing structure and just overall issues as far as feet and legs. So we really need to manage muscle and make sure we're giving that animal the best chance of success by really managing overall muscle shape. So general rule of thumb. So I'm just going to use Sunglow feeds because that's what I know best and that's what I use. If that pig is coming off, if you just bought this pig and it's super, super heavy muscled, we need to transition down to our lower protein feed so that way we can let that skeleton grow. So basically like Sunglow 16G versus if that hog is really sound, really well built, it is not blowing out of its seams and it's very balanced and natural. I wouldn't necessarily say plain, but it just looks really well now for the future. You can go straight to 18G. There's not much issue with that. So it's really trying to read that animal, what it's going to become, and then trying to vision out how we get there without overdoing it. And then from there, it's kind of deciding what goal we have for that animal. Are we going to show it at the jackpot shows? Are we going to show it at just the end goal show? And if that's the case, we're going to feed them entirely different. Because these jackpot shows, you want that animal looking 12 o'clock at every jackpot show. That's really, really hard, but it's kind of doable. The problem you get to, though, is we really like to talk about maturity curve. And that's where I'm saying you got to vision out what that animal's going to become. Because if you hit that maturity curve, that 12 o'clock stage way too early, it can sometimes be really hard to bring that animal back, especially quickly. Because they can get stale, they can get overdone. They look like they peaked, 5 years ago type. So you really need to be careful what that animal looks like and make sure you're not pushing it too hard too early. So it all comes back to how it looks. So how fresh it is, how green it is, how much muscle it has, how much condition it has. One of the biggest mistakes I see a lot of people make is that they're feeding these animals way too heavily or way too hard. So they put on fat way too early. Fat hogs are a pain because there's certain areas on that hog that are really hard to pull fat off of or feed fat off of. So you really got to be careful with it. That is why all these different feed companies have, 3 or 4 or 5 different feeds that have very minor differences amongst the feeds, like 18G and 16G. It's an 18% protein, 16% protein. 18G is a 1,1 lysine and 16 is a 1,0 lysine. That doesn't seem like a lot, but they very much feed different. And there's a lot of people where we'll do half and half even. So we definitely don't want fat hogs. We can always feed fat into them. That's easy. But we definitely also don't want on the other side of the spectrum where it's just this lean muscle machine. We need to build body, especially rib shape over time. So it really just comes back to being able to read that animal. As far as just how we feed pigs, so there's really 2 ways to do it. So you can use a self-feeder, which is very functional. It's easy. It's the easiest way to do it. Or you can hand feed them. So I will always recommend hand feeding hogs just because you have control. You are monitoring them daily. You can see any health problems. So if that pig typically comes to the feeder and this time it doesn't, you're going to know it. So that, raises the alarms a little bit. So self-feeders are easy. And if you can't see your animals every day, self-feeders are the way to go. But there are problems that come with self-feeders. So self-feeders, a lot of times people just load them up with a couple bags of feed and then that feed sits in there for weeks. That can lead to stale, moldy, nasty feed that pig can very much smell and can make them maybe not eat as much. At the same time with self-feeders, those pigs can overeat. Pigs, especially on a good feed, and this is where I always push a good feed, no matter if it's the most expensive one or not, just get a good feed. You will rarely ever feed more than 6 pounds a day. And a lot of these really, really dense feeds, you don't need more than 4 pounds a day. So generally speaking, hogs will convert 3 to 1. So for every 3 pounds of feed they eat, they will gain 1 pound. So if you feed 6 pounds of feed, they should gain 2 pounds. Now that is very general, all encompassing, and show pigs definitely are not gaining the way commercial hogs are. So it's something very much to note that these show pigs are typically gaining less than that. A lot of times it's almost 4 to 1 or 5 to 1. So a lot of these hogs are maybe gaining 1 pound to 1.5 pounds a day, even though we still have these minimum rated gain requirements in some of these pairs. So something to note that work with your breeder, talk to your breeder on what their genetics will typically gain per day. But if we get a commercial style hog, especially Durocs, because Durocs are great, Duroc Hampshires and some others, they should gain 3 to 1 all day long. And really, we will never need to feed more than 6 pounds a day, because at that point, a lot of that just ends up being deposited as fat, and those nutrients, what's the word for it? Your gain for your cost is it levels out, and at that point, you're just wasting feed, because if you give that pig a self-feeder, there are absolutely pigs that'll eat 9 pounds a day, 10 pounds a day, which is way more feed than they need and way more than they'll actually convert. So I will show up at some places that have these animals on self-feeder and they are wide open and they're eating all day long. These pigs are really, really fat and they're really, really heavy. So it's about managing that. So you can use a self-feeder as long as you manage intake and you keep it clean. But I will still always recommend hand feeding them because you have so much more control. And then you can truly control who's actually eating. A lot of times there's these self-feeders, they have 6, 7, 8 pigs in a pen. Who's actually eating the feed? There's going to be the big one that's pushing everybody out and the little one who's missing it all. So if you can hand feed, and especially individual or feed 2 at a time, it's always more successful. For commercial, you really just need around that 75-pound mark. You can switch to just a basic grower finisher feed. So there's a lot of them out there. Like we have our mill growth and feed that those animals will grow great on it. It's at a very good price point. It's a meal-based feed. So those animals can grow really, really well. And you can still feed show pigs that. The reason we feed these expensive show feeds are they'll make that animal look the part. So they put on muscle a little different. They put on fat a little different. Skin and hair looks much better because of the omega-3 and 6 fatty acids. And just the overall amino acid profile is different. It's not, show feeds aren't necessarily built to make them just grow as fast as possible and get to that finish weight, but rather it's meant for them to look the part. So again, it depends on your end goal. So you do not need a show feed to show a pig at the county fair. You can just get a commercial style feed if your goal is to make the sale. It's difficult to be super competitive at the county fairs without feeding a show feed, but it's absolutely not out of the question. So we talked about rate of gain. So you really need to pencil out how many pounds per day that animal is gaining. So that way, when we get to the county fair, we don't show up and we are way behind the 8 ball or way over. So get the right age animal, know what the rate of gain of that pig is. So that way we can really track coming in at county fairs. The biggest problem we see every single year at county fairs are there's always a pile of pigs underweight or that haven't met rate of gain. And a lot of that is either they bought the wrong age animal, or maybe the management practices weren't right, or they just simply weren't feeding enough feed or feeding too much feed. So you will always see more pigs go underweight than you'll ever see go overweight. And a lot of it is because they bought the wrong age animal. They're buying too young animals. And at some point, it can be really hard to push them. So with that being said, we're obviously in the county fair season now, but for next year, really make sure you're buying the right age animal. And then if you can, weigh them every 2 weeks. You can go buy these little platform scales on Amazon for that matter. You can buy them all over the place. I'm sure there's some local suppliers that have them that you can use, and they're not that expensive, but that gives you real weight all the time. If you can weigh weekly, you can understand if that animal is gaining, how much it's gaining, and then we can calculate out 75 days out. Okay, are we way behind, or are we at a really good spot and need to slow down? Holding pigs is difficult, but it is very, very doable. But you would always rather kind of slow them down and hold them around the 200-pound mark versus the 250-pound mark, because when you hold an animal, no matter what you do, you can moderately keep them fresh, but they will get stale at some level and they will get gaunt up in their gut. They'll get sucked up and they will not look that 12 o'clock that we want. So if we can hold them around that 200-pound range for a little bit, and that way 30 days out of the fair, we can really push and push and push coming into it so they are fresh and they really pop. That's what we want. Holding a pig at 250, it limits us so much because we can no longer feed some of these supplements that really make these pigs really come into their own, because all we're doing is watching weight. So if we need to hold a pig, what I like to do and what I recommend is feed anywhere from 1 to 2 pounds of complete feed a day, and then a pound to a pound and a half of some sort of vitamin, mineral, protein supplement. Like what we like is Final Control. Some people use Champion Drive. Some people use Muscle and Motion. And then some sort of beet pulp, citrus pulp products like Sunglow Full Tank or Ultra Full or Depth Charge, something that goes in that gut and expands. So that way it makes them feel full and they have a little less desire for food. So that way it just hopefully eliminates a little bit of stress. So 1 to 2 pounds of complete feed, some Final Control, 1 to 1.5 pounds, and then some Full Tank to just mix together. And that's all per day feeding. That's not per feeding. So we can do that for a couple weeks, manage rate gain, manage weight. So that way, 30 days out, if we're at that 210 to 220 mark, we can really, really push with just all depending on what they need, but we can push with the right feeds and then the right supplements to really come into that fair looking awesome. And the other thing, since we're in the heat of the summer and we're about to be at a bunch of these county fairs, is really, really trying to keep them comfortable. So pigs cannot sweat, and they will do anything they can to stay cool. So if we give them space out in a mud hole out in the sun, they're going to sit out in that mud hole, sit out in the sun and get burnt and get nasty skin and hair. So we need to keep them in a barn, keep their pen clean, put fans on them all the time, and just do everything we can to keep them cool and comfortable. So manage all of that. Keep the pen clean, keep fans on them, and then from there, the most important ingredient in any animal's diet is water. So pigs will drink water in order to eat. Since they cannot sweat, they drink water to cool down and then so they can eat. So we need to make sure we have cool, fresh water in front of them. If there's a lot of different ways to get water to pigs, but if you use a trough or a tub or some sort of barrel or something like that is not a self-feed watering system, don't fill the water up all the way. Fill it just enough so that way you're filling it up, like say every day or every other day. If you fill that thing up and fill it up once a week, that water is going to get hot and gross. So the cooler that water is, the better off for that pig is to a certain extent. So we do not want that water sitting in the sun and getting hot. Clean, cool, fresh water does so much more for pigs than a lot of people give it credit for. I know there's a lot of people that get a hold of Karen and I every year to try to help them, and we go look at what they have going on, or they send us pictures, and the water is typically the biggest culprit for why that animal goes off feed, because it got hot one week, the water got nasty, maybe there's algae and mold growing in there, and then that animal goes off feed. So water is really, really crucial. I am always adamantly against pooling water no matter what coming into any of these weigh-ins, just because when it's this hot and stressful, it is very, very dangerous. So we need to keep water in front of them. And same thing at the fairs. Using some form of electrolyte is very, very helpful to them. It'll make that muscle pop because we're super hydrating that animal, but also it just makes sure that animal comes into that fair looking really good and feeling great at the same time. I mean, just think of Gatorade for athletes, right? There's a reason it exists. So let's treat these animals like an athlete and give them what they need to be successful. So we need to keep water in front of them. And then at the fair, this is, very pertinent to what the time frame that we're at right now. We need to feed something to get these animals full. So especially if you've been holding these animals for the past week or two, these animals are going to be sucked up in their gut. There's not going to be much in there, and they're going to look pretty gaunt. So we need to make sure that we get them full. And you got to be a little careful with it because you don't want to just dump a bunch of feed to them right away and get them over full and just feeling like crap. So we need to use something like I like to use Sunglow Smorfil, maybe a little bit of milk and a little bit of Game On mixed with some water and let it sit overnight, and then just feed them like pound increments at a time. So get them as full as you think they should be from a comfort standpoint. So you want to get them comfortable, but not overdone. You don't want them going across that show ring looking uncomfortable, full, and bloated. You know, I think if I go to a buffet and I overeat and feel like crap, you can notice it versus, if I have a very healthy course where I feel good, I can go out and, run a mile type. So you want to get that animal full, but you don't want to overdo it. And there's a fine line there. And I always like to soak those feet just because it gets a little extra water in them, and typically there's a little better consumption with that. So you need to make that animal look very fresh and just make them look awesome coming into that fair. And typically, and we'll kind of end on this point, but this goes back to when we first get them and when they start growing. Not every hog should be shown at that 285-pound mark. The ones that are big skeleton, big framed, absolutely should be shown at that mark, or 280 to 290. But there's a lot of hogs that are a little more compact, a little lower to the ground, that need to be shown at 250, 260. Because if you get that hog overdone and way too much fat, that hog is going to look terrible against some of these hogs that are truly built for that range. So know what they really should be weighed in at and where they should compete to let them be as successful as possible. Because you can see when you go to any of these fairs, you'll see the hogs that are fat. You'll see it in their jowl, which some of it's genetics and hard, but you'll see it in their jowl. You'll see it behind their flank. You'll see it in their shoulder blade. So when that animal takes a step, you can't see that shoulder blade pop up, or you barely can, it's too fat. You'll see it along that loin and top shape. Like the barrows are the worst about it, where they deposit a lot of that upper fat sometimes, and it just looks plain. It looks round. It doesn't look like it has much shape or sharpness to it. So, yeah, a lot of it just comes back to reading that animal and understanding how to adjust for that, because there's 1,000,001 different supplements out there, and every single year there's a new supplement that promises you the world, but we need to know why we're using a supplement before we use it. We don't need to feed 7 different supplements that are oftentimes counteracting each other just because they're the newest fad and the newest marketing ploy on Facebook. So use what is actually necessary for your animal for it to be successful. So I rambled a lot there. So you may have questions, so feel free to go ahead.
I can't think of any questions, but if anyone listening does think of anything, is there a good contact for them to reach out to?
Yeah. So you can go to our Facebook. That's a good starting point. So the Mill Show Stock Solutions on Facebook, and then Karen Halloway and myself, Nathan Halloway, our phone number's there, I think, on a bunch of posts. So you can always text or call us. We go out and see a lot of animals. We get a lot of pictures and videos every single week. We want to help if we can. So if you're in a bad situation, or you just want a second opinion, or you want to know what you should be doing to your animals, we are always here to help. We service from Washington County to the entire eastern part of Maryland, the entire state of Delaware, southeastern PA. We service pretty much the entire state of Maryland. So we want to help if we can help you all, and that's what we're here for. So.
All right. Well, I appreciate you coming out and speaking. Thank you so much for taking time out and giving us some great advice.